In our resolution, we are calling for a fight against racism and hate speech, and I think it is almost unbearable what I have to listen to, and we hear fake news here. There is no mass migration in Europe. And I have to say, I think it is unacceptable that you are saying that the majority of citizens do not want migration. All countries must make a contribution with the acceptance and integration of refugees, and that specifically the US, where almost all of the citizens were originally migrants.
Thank you very much. Now, the United Nations wants an international compact on migration to cover what it calls all dimensions of international migration in a holistic and comprehensive manner. This is supposed to be a non-legally binding document, but the danger is that if enough nations sign up to it, it may become what is known as customary international law. So let's be clear what the compact is all about. It's an illegal migrants charter. Its purpose is to make illegal migration legal and to facilitate it in greater numbers. The United Nations includes many countries that are deeply corrupt politically and financially. They cannot provide their citizens with anything resembling democratic and prosperous societies protected by the rule of law, impartially implied. But the one thing that they can produce is more people, millions of whom want to flee their homelands, and who can blame them? The Global Compact is part of the intention of a global political elite to flood Europe and Western nations with never-ending millions of migrants from Africa, the Middle East and beyond. It is their intention to change the continent of Europe into something else in terms of its existing populations, culture and civilization. Immigration is of itself neither good nor bad. It depends entirely on the context. Every democratic nation-state should have the right and freedom to decide its own immigration policy. What we're seeing in Europe now can only be described as invasion and settlement. It has nothing to do with immigration policy, but is an unprecedented exercise in social engineering in pursuit of an ideological goal. If European nations need a global compact on migration, it is one for international cooperation to protect our borders and control immigration, not one to make the current situation worse.
This is a time to deliver on the UN aim, a global compact for migration that will manage this and face up to the enemies of this European compromise. Outside the European Union, we've got Mr. Trump, and within the EU, we've got the xenophobic discourse of certain governments, such as Mr. Orban. We need to change Europe's negative attitude towards immigration. Immigration is not a crisis, neither it is a threat. The UN plan to establish a UN compact on refugees is most worrying. It's based on that mass migration is inevitable and that we should always welcome ever more migrants, whether they're genuine political refugees or just mere economic migrants. None of the reasons adduced to impose this forced migration is convincing. The demographic decline of the European Union has to be fought not by migration but by policies that promote a higher birth rate. This is all a mirage to camouflage a sinister reality, and that's the sole EU approach. The first duty of a state is ensure the security of its people and preserving the national identity of its people. It's not a pact that we need that will only encourage migration, but we need international cooperation, and we also need to ensure that member states ensure decent living for people living within their borders. Thank you.
We have to open the EU's borders. We have to increase the number of quota refugees. We have to remove barriers for family reunification. We have to grant amnesty for asylum seekers who have waited so long, and we have to ensure the undocumented their rights and their security.
Too often immigration is considered good or bad. I take a different view. I see the benefits of immigration, but only if it is managed, controlled and legal. But I also see the negatives of immigration on communities if we continue the chaotic, uncontrolled mass migration policies that we see from many in this chamber and across the global elites who support it. The problem with this UN Global Compact is that it assumes all migration is exactly the same, and it also ignores illegal migration. It also says, more importantly, that international bodies should have power over the nation states to determine the setting of immigration policies across the globe. The frustration of the people in Europe and the world to deal with the economic problems of mass migration is real. It should be the voters who elect parties to deal with this that have the power, not the unelected global elites or their lackeys.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Avramopoulos, you speak about Hungary as if we were sort of the deviant. Let me tell you, we are not the deviants. We represent the majority of the citizens, the population of Europe. The majority are fed up with mass migration. They do not want any more migrants, and they want to send back those who are now here. We are on one side, and on the other side there is the whole corrupt political elite. The thing is, the majority of the citizens of Europe cannot really speak up because they are punished, they are oppressed, there are all these hate speech laws that silence people. It's really strange that we are the ones who are accused by the European Union of not being democratic, of not having freedom of speech. We do have freedom of speech, and we speak up for the majority of the citizens of Europe. But they should also speak up, and they should support Hungary in our efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Morvai. I think that there is no reason to polarize between you and your political party and all the rest as corrupt politicians, so I hope that that was just misunderstanding my side.
The UN says that we should take in all the migrants of the world, and that Italy should continue with its open door policy for everybody. This is crazy. In 5 years in Italy, 700,000 migrants have landed. And in 80% of the cases, these are clandestine immigrants who are escaping from war, but could also hide terrorists, as Europol has said. Over the years, Brussels and governments on the left in Italy have promoted this kind of immigration, which is also crazy. In recent years, Italy has spent 14 billion euros, that's Italian taxpayers' money, to put up these migrants in hotels and so on. And then there are social costs as well for our towns and cities, violence, theft and so on. Enough is enough. Italians don't want to take in these illegal migrants anymore because they destabilize our country. We need proper, clear rules. We need to defend our borders, and we need to combat the traffickers, as well as deporting those who are there illegally. Thank you.
Colleagues, prior to the visit by Mrs. Merkel, Mr. Timmermans said, "Thank you very much. Now it is possible for the 100 or 140,000 Africans to come to Europe." Mr. Avramopoulos, you're saying the US is moving away from the compact, and why is that? Why aren't you having a referendum in Europe? Why don't you let the citizens decide what the people actually want? Europe cannot integrate this mass migration and doesn't want to integrate these migrants. And just ask people in local communities whether or not they want to live with these people. They have to introduce special laws so that citizens no longer dare to say that they're fed up of this. We need to change our policies.
We're talking about people with fundamental rights, and we need to ensure that we create legal and safe areas for migrants to travel to Europe. That's the only way to fight traffickers, and we also need to create real opportunities for young Africans. Thank you.
I think this discussion shows very clearly that what the migration crisis has shown. There's too much ideology in this topic, and I think it's inhumane if somebody act as if they have all the wisdom and think that we have to just open up, we have to make concessions to the migrants, we must give them a safe crossing, etc. It all sounds great, but, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, it's an illusion. We can see, of course, in Europe, especially in some countries, including Germany, we have mass migration, and we must see what is doable. and we haven't achieved this. In some communities in Germany, we've gone beyond that. Mrs. Sippel, you know that very well. That certain mayors in Germany are writing letters and saying the situation is no longer under control. If you have 20,000 euros a year spent on each refugee each year, with the same amount of money in North Africa, we can take care of 50 or 100 people. And that should make us reflect whether we are dealing with things in the right place.
The UN Pact for Migration and Refugees covers two things. It covers migrants who are travelling for economic reasons, and also covers refugees who should only, and asylum seekers who should only get temporary protection. That's not really migration. It's been said quite correctly that we have millions of migrants and only just a few come to Europe, and yet we're arguing as though this was a situation in which there was mass migration to Europe. But we are, with our policies, only helping just a few people. With our money we could help far more people in situ. Now this UN compact will increase the temptations for people to migrate and will therefore increase problems. Mrs. Sippel, it leaves a very bitter taste when you talk about the most disastrous example for migration.
The compacts of the UN derive from good intentions to make safe illegal migration, which is something that you refuse to stop. The global elite are arrogant. They no longer hide their objectives. The Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Guterres, saying that migration is unavoidable and that multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religion societies are a richness. Or even you yourself, Commissioner Avramopoulos, who said in December last year that we all have to be willing to accept migration and diversity, that it's an imperative for our nations, but countries have said that the decisions will be taken by Americans, but we need to think about Europeans first and foremost, and this is why we need to denounce and not applaud these compacts.
Can we help all of the people who are displaced in the world? It would be nice if we could, but there are many people who are fleeing something or other, and I feel that we have to recognise that our services are limited. Our resources are limited. We can't open the door wide and allow ourselves to be invaded by large economic force which will then draw on our welfare resources. There'll be problems with work, they won't be able to find enough work, and this will cause problems for our society and lead to social exclusion. Helping 1 million refugees who are in loco is going to be easier than trying to help them in Sweden, for example. We do have some problems with the refugee camps because they're not working properly. People should have access to schools, to food and to water. Setting up some kind of structure for the future and having the courage to help people to go back home is what we should be focusing on. We should try and help as many as we can to do that.
The report is confusing two things, refugees and migrant. The right to asylum for a small number of group is being combined with the wish to migrate of thousands, and that's really where the problem is coming from. Internal mobility is being combined with helping those coming from Syria, and the report doesn't suggest that there's an increase in migrants arriving at borders, but I think it's important that we make it clear. There are countries which are not able to deal with the number of migrants, and the report says that a lot more needs to be done in terms of health care, education, accommodation, social inclusion, justice, social protection, etc. But these are all things that are under pressure in member states of the EU. And mass migration would lead to the disappearance of these things.